True Conspiracy. Hello, my name is Charles Allen and welcome to True Conspiracy. Let's get to it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Bob Crane. Crane frequently videotaped and photographed his own sexual escapades. During the run of Hogan's Heroes, Richard Dawson introduced Crane to John Henry Carpenter, a regional sales manager for Sony Electronics, who often helped famous clients with their video equipment. The two men struck up a friendship and began going to bars together. Crane attracted many women due to his celebrity status and introduced Carpenter to them as his manager. Later, Crane and Carpenter would videotape their joint sexual encounters. While Crane's son, Robert, later insisted that all of the women were aware of the videotaping and consented to it, some, according to one source, had no idea that they had been recorded until informed by Scottsdale police after Crane's murder. Carpenter later became national sales manager at Akai, and arranged his business trips to coincide with Crane's dinner theater touring schedule so that the two could continue seducing and videotaping women after Hogan's Heroes had run its course. In June 1978, Crane was living in the Winfield Place Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona, during a run of beginner's luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater. On the afternoon of June 29, Crane's co-star Victoria and Barry entered his apartment after he failed to show up for a lunch meeting and discovered his body. Crane had been bludgeoned to death with a weapon that was never identified, though investigators believed it to be a camera tripod. An electrical cord had been tied around his neck. Crane's funeral, on July 5, 1978, was held at St. Paul the Apostle Catholic Church in Westwood. An estimated 200 family members and friends attended, including Patty Duke, John Aston, and Carol O'Connor. Pallbearers included Hogan's Heroes producer Edward Feldman, co-stars Larry Hovis, Robert Clary, and Crane's son, Robert. He was interred in Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth, California. Olson later had his remains relocated to Westwood Village Memorial Park in Westwood, and was buried beside him, under her stage name, Sigrid Valdez, after her death from lung cancer in 2007. The Scottsdale Police Department, small in size at the time, had no homicide division, and was ill-equipped to handle such a high-profile murder investigation. The crime scene yielded few clues, no evidence of forced entry was found, and nothing of financial value was missing. Detectives examined Crane's extensive videotape collection, which led them to John Henry Carpenter, who had flown to Phoenix on June 25 to spend a few days with Crane. Carpenter's rental car was impounded and searched. Several blood smears were found that matched Crane's blood type. No one else known to have been in the car, including Carpenter, tested for that type. DNA testing was not yet available. With no other significant material evidence, the Maricopa County Attorney declined to file charges. In 1990, Scottsdale Police Detective Barry Vassell and Maricopa County Attorney's Office investigator Jim Raines, a former Phoenix homicide investigator, re-examined the evidence from 1978 and persuaded the county attorney to reopen the case. Although DNA testing of the blood found in Carpenter's rental car was inconclusive, Raines discovered an evidence photograph of the car's interior that appeared to show a piece of brain tissue. The actual tissue samples recovered from the car had been lost, but an Arizona judge ruled that the new evidence was admissible. In June 1992, Carpenter was arrested and charged with Crane's murder. At the 1994 trial, Crane's son, Robert, testified that in the weeks before his father's death, Crane had repeatedly expressed a desire to sever his friendship with Carpenter. He said Carpenter had become a hanger-on and a nuisance to the point of being obnoxious. "My dad expressed that he just didn't need Carpenter kind of hanging around him anymore," he said. He testified that Crane had called Carpenter the night before the murder and ended their friendship. Carpenter's attorneys attacked the prosecution's case as circumstantial and inconclusive. They presented evidence, including witnesses from the restaurant where the two men had dined the evening prior to the murder, that Carpenter and Crane were still the best of friends. They noted that the murder weapon had never been identified or found. The prosecution's camera tripod theory was sheer speculation, they said, based solely on Carpenter's occupation. They disputed the claim that the newly discovered evidence photo showed brain tissue, and presented many examples of sloppy work by police, such as the mishandling and misplacing of evidence, including the crucial tissue sample itself. They pointed out that Crane had been videotaped and photographed in compromising sexual positions with numerous women, implying that any one of them, fearing blackmail, might have been the killer. Other potential suspects proposed by defense attorneys included angry husbands and boyfriends of the seduced women, and an actor who had sworn vengeance after a violent argument with Crane in Texas several months earlier. Carpenter was acquitted. He continued to maintain his innocence until his death 4 years later, in 1998. After the trial, Crane's oldest son, Robert, speculated publicly that his father's widow, Patricia Olson, might have had a role in instigating the crime. "Nobody got a dime out of the murder," he said, "except for one person," alluding to Crane's will, which excluded him, his siblings, and his mother, with the entire estate left to Olson. Crane's son repeated his suspicions in a 2015 book, Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. The case's prosecutor, Maricopa County District Attorney Rick Romley, responded, "We never characterized Patty as a suspect," adding, "I am convinced John Carpenter murdered Bob Crane." Officially, Crane's murder remains unsolved. In November 2016, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office permitted Phoenix television reporter John Hook to submit the 1978 blood samples from Carpenter's rental car for retesting, using a more advanced DNA technique than the one used in 1990. 2 sequences were identified, one from an unknown male, and the other too degraded to reach a conclusion. This testing consumed all of the remaining DNA from the rental car, making further tests impossible. Freemasons. The literature on Freemasonry does not offer straightforward explanations. Is it benign or bent on subverting government? Is it a community of knowledge or of the occult? Such questions are not new. Since its development in the 18th century, Freemasonry has drawn the ire of the Catholic Church, right-wing politicians and, more recently, Britain's Home Office. Fearing that Masons in the police and judiciary were giving preferential treatment to other Masons. The Home Office between 1998 and 2009 required judicial appointees to disclose their membership. Freemasonry can appear incomprehensible because it contains no coherent ideology or doctrine, and is defined instead by a commitment to universal brotherhood and self-improvement. Nor does a single governing body exist. It is made up of a loose network of groups, known as lodges, that fall under regional and national Grand Lodges. What, then, is Freemasonry all about? It grew out of medieval stonemasons' guilds, which set wages, trained apprentices and regulated who could practice the craft. In early modern Europe, Masons studied measurement, geometry and mathematical calculation, as well as bricklaying. Expert Masons acted as architects and engineers, earning a higher status than most other tradesmen. Advancement within guilds implied authority, and the path from apprentice to master was marked by ritual. To elevate their trade, Masons invented elaborate histories dating back to ancient Egypt. Guilds were also social organizations whose members met informally to drink in lodges. The term first referred to the temporary accommodations at construction sites. Out of financial necessity, guilds began accepting non-stonemasons and charging them dues in the early 1600s. These would be educated men interested in mathematics and antiquity. While working masons would hew stone and raise perpendiculars, the gentlemen members were to practice secrecy, morality, and good fellowship. By the end of the 17th century, as guilds became obsolete, the majority of members were gentlemen enthusiasts. The rapid spread of Freemasonry in the 18th century, first in England and then abroad, fitted within a broader expansion in club membership as cities grew. Masonic lodges resembled other clubs in some respects. Members met for lectures and dined together. But Freemasonry was exceptional. Its rituals were more secretive and elaborate than those of other clubs. It was also secular, nonpartisan and egalitarian, at least in theory. Lodges should conciliate true friendship among persons that must else have remained at a perpetual distance, explained one manual from 1723. Sectarian affiliation did not determine membership, and political talk was forbidden. Real worth and personal merit only granted entry, which had to be unanimously agreed upon by other lodge members. Enlightenment ideals of cosmopolitanism, progress and perfectibility animated early Masonic literature. Knowledge, it was believed, could ease divisions of class and nationality while ensuring universal solidarity. Freemasonry was not so inclusive as envisioned, remaining largely inaccessible to women and the working class. Still, lodges permitted a degree of commingling between the aristocracy and educated professionals rarely seen before. They also offered places for upper-middle-class men to enact abstract Enlightenment values about equality, secularism and merit. Margaret Jacob, a historian, has argued that lodges became schools of government and laboratories for civic participation. Masons paid dues, swore oaths of loyalty, voted, debated and elected officers. Today, at 1.1 million members, lodge membership in America is at its lowest ever, down from 4.1 million members in 1959. This decline mirrors weak participation in civic groups more broadly. In his study of contemporary Freemasonry, J. Scott Kenney, a sociologist, tells of Masons joining the group in search of greater meaning. One called it the antidote to today's Jerry Springer morality. Dorothy Kilgallan. Journalism can be a dangerous job, especially investigative journalism. History has documented numerous reporters who were kidnapped or murdered because of knowledge they may have possessed, and some theorists believe one of them is Dorothy Kilgallan, an American journalist and TV game show personality who died of an alleged drug overdose in 1965. Kilgallan was known for being a panelist on the TV show What's My Line? Along with the voice of Broadway, a newspaper column she began writing in 1938. At its height, Kilgallan's column appeared in over 140 newspapers in the United States. Her articles mostly centered around celebrity gossip and show business, but one of her final research projects involved both politics and crime, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. While investigating the case, however, Kilgallan passed, leaving many to speculate whether there was more to her death. No one has ever proved anything other than what the autopsy claimed, but one modern lawyer and author, Mark Shaw, has taken it upon himself to investigate her life and death. Was Dorothy Kilgallan slain or was it merely a case of an accidental overdose? Shaw claims there may have been foul play and something more sinister than an odd, and is committed to opening a broader investigation into the mysterious story. Kilgallan may have been the journalist who knew too much, and paid the price for it. Kilgallan's last day alive was a typical one. She spent the day and most of the evening working on the panel of the CBS TV show What's My Line? In New York. After filming, she went to the Regency Hotel bar for a drink before heading home. She returned to the apartment she shared with her husband, and he reported later she had been in good spirits. Kilgallan went to bed shortly after arriving home, but did not sleep in the same room as her husband. On the morning of November 8, 1965, 52-year-old Kilgallan was found dead by her hairdresser and a maid in her townhouse. She was sitting up in bed, still wearing makeup, false eyelashes, and a flower in her hair from the previous night. Autopsy results claim Kilgallan died from a fatal combination of alcohol and prescription pills. Many assumed the autopsy results meant Kilgallan had a secret substance abuse problem, which tainted her posthumous reputation. Others believed something else entirely may have happened. After all, Kilgallan was known to take an investigative approach to her journalism, and many posited her research could have ended her life. Kilgallan considered John F. Kennedy a friend and even visited the president in the White House. Like many, she was devastated by his assassination in 1963. A week after his death, Kilgallan wrote about it in her news column, stating, "The American people have just lost a beloved president. It's a dark chapter in our history, but we have the right to read every word of it." When the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, aka the Warren Commission, concluded Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, Kilgallan claimed the report was laughable. Kilgallan began researching the case herself and started interviewing key witnesses, eventually compiling a thick file over the course of a few years. Kilgallan supposedly told friends, "I'm going to break the real story and have the biggest scoop of the century." Legal analyst and author Mark Shaw published a book about Kilgallan's death in 2016, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. Through the use of the Freedom of Information Act, Shaw obtained several previously unreleased documents, including lab results from Kilgallan's autopsy report. While the initial report stated Kilgallan had Seconal in her system, a sleeping pill prescribed to her by a doctor, the lab report also claimed she had 2 additional barbiturates in her system, 2-inulin and butyl. Another curious discovery Shaw made was a statement in the autopsy's lab reports regarding a powdery substance found on the glass beside Kilgallan's bed. Shaw believes the existence of the powder residue on the glass proves someone drugged Kilgallan's drink. Neither the discovery of additional drugs in her system nor the powdered substance near her drink conclusively proves Kilgallan was murdered. But for Shaw, the revelation certainly put her alleged odd in a new light. In addition to Kilgallan's complete autopsy paperwork, Mark Shaw obtained an FBI file on her which revealed she was under FBI surveillance at the time of her death. The notes in the file referenced Kilgallan's trip to Florida to interview Cuban exiles about their negative opinions on Fidel Castro, a controversial move at the time. Additionally, the FBI had notes covering Kilgallan's research on John F. Kennedy's death, as well as her reporting on the trial of Jack Ruby, the Texas nightclub owner who fatally shot Lee Harvey Oswald. In fact, Kilgallan published Ruby's court testimony before it was made public to anyone, and that reportedly upset FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Kilgallan was perhaps the first known journalist to write about the alleged John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe affair. Her article published August 3, 1962, 2 days later, Monroe was found dead from an alleged OD. Following Monroe's death, Kilgallan began publicly questioning the autopsy report, believing there was more to the story. Coincidentally, Kilgallan passed 3 years later in the same manner. One of the details of Monroe's death that Kilgallan questioned was the light left on in Monroe's bedroom. Kilgallan wrote, "If she were just trying to get to sleep, and took the overdose of the pills accidentally, why was the light on? Usually, people sleep better in the dark." When Kilgallan's body was discovered in her townhome, the light was also on in her room. Throughout the late 40s, Kilgallan and singer Frank Sinatra appeared together in public photographs on several occasions. But in 1956, Kilgallan wrote a multi-part feature story titled The Real Frank Sinatra Story, which delved into Sinatra's private life with a long list of his many romances. Sinatra took the story very personally and began going out of his way to speak ill of Kilgallan publicly. He attacked her appearance, referring to her as the chinless wonder and comparing her to a chipmunk. Sinatra even went so far as to send her a tombstone. Kilgallan believed Louisiana crime boss Carlos Marcello had something to do with the Kennedy assassination. In fact, right before her death, she mentioned to friends and colleagues that she had a trip planned to New Orleans to speak with an informant and had discovered Marcello was working with Oswald. If Kilgallan made the connection that Marcello was involved in Kennedy's death, she was not the only one. The House Select Committee on Assassinations went against the Warren Commission in 1979, reporting Oswald had not acted alone in the murder. Moreover, they expressed that Marcello had the motive, means, and opportunity to plan and execute a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Investigative author Mark Shaw theorized that Kilgallan's research and intentions of writing a tell-all book terrified Marcello, and gave him reason to H. Shaw also believes Marcello probably burned Kilgallan's research file on Kennedy's death. One of the last people to allegedly see Kilgallan alive was Catherine Stone. A contestant on What's My Line? Stone was at the Regency Hotel bar after work. While at the bar, Stone witnessed Kilgallan having a private conversation with a mystery man. Following his investigation decades after Kilgallan's death, Mark Shaw later claimed the man was Ron Pataky, a journalist from Ohio who was friends with Kilgallan, and alleged the two were possibly having an affair while Pataky leaked information about John F. Kennedy's assassination to Kilgallan. Shaw also thinks Pataky may ultimately have been responsible for Kilgallan's death, as Pataky wrote somewhat cryptic, but arguably gloating, poems about Kilgallan after her death. One of the poems, titled Never Trust a Stiff at a Typewriter, included the line, "Somebody who's dead could tell no tales." In another poem, Vodka Roulette, there's a drawing of a bartender making drinks with Pataky's caption, "Make one of 'em poison." When confronted with Shaw's theory, Pataky stated he never had an affair with Kilgallan and was not at the hotel bar the night before her death. Pataky also claimed he loved Kilgallan dearly. Kilgallan was a woman to be reckoned with during the 50s. She was a professional businesswoman juggling several successful careers, along with being a wife and mother. She was considered an A-list celebrity and was known for throwing lavish parties at her home with guests including Jane Mansfield and Beatles member George Harrison. Kilgallan made the modern equivalent of millions of dollars annually and was well respected in her line of work. Ernest Hemingway once referred to her as the greatest woman writer in the world, because of her coverage of the infamous Drive Sam Shepherd murder trial. Some claim Kilgallan was solely responsible for getting Shepherd's murder conviction overturned. She revealed the presiding judge had called her into his chambers, asking her for an autograph and telling her that Shepherd was guilty as hell. Kilgallan had her own prestigious career, but she married a prominent man, as well. Richard Dick Kilmar worked as a radio personality, television and film actor, and Broadway producer. The couple married on April 6, 1940, and eventually had 3 children. Kilmar and Kilgallan even worked together on a radio show they ran from their home, Breakfast with Dorothy and Dick. Since Kilgallan was a person of many talents, an interviewer once asked her about her favorite career, to which she replied, "My first love is the newspaper, and always will be." Journalism may have run through her veins, considering her father, James Kilgallan, was a well-known reporter with a career spanning 75 years. James began working for Chicago newspapers at just 15 years old before moving to New York to work for Hearst Headline Service. Kilgallan's file pertaining to the John F. Kennedy assassination has never been found. Mark Shaw believes it was destroyed. Whoever decided to silence Dorothy, I believe, took that file and burned it. Amateur sleuth Gene Bryant has also done a fair amount of research into Kilgallan's death. He claims her body contained a high dosage of nicotine, as noted in her autopsy. But this is mysterious, he says, because she didn't smoke. We found out nicotine can be injected, which could have caused a heart attack. Bryant also claims it was 6 hours after Kilgallan's death before any detectives arrived. And Bryant says Detective Jack Doyle, who worked the case, didn't believe the overdose story. Others who have studied the issue agree that Kilgallan's death was too strange and coincidentally timed to be anything but intentional. MKUltra. Project MKUltra, sometimes referred to as the CIA's mind control program, was the codename given to an illegal program of experiments on human subjects, designed and undertaken by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Experiments on humans were intended to identify and develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogations and torture, in order to weaken the individual to force confessions through mind control. Organized through the Scientific Intelligence Division of the CIA, the project coordinated with the Special Operations Division of the U.S. Due to the legal and ethical questions that would have been raised about the project, it was administered in absolute secrecy. And it worked as such for over 20 years, during which many deaths might be associated with separate projects of the program. However, the majority of death and torture cases of Americans that are attributed to the CIA's mind control program would remain speculative because there isn't any proof to confirm them as facts. Headed by Sidney Gottlieb, the MKUltra project was started on the order of CIA Director Alan Welsh Dulles on April 13, 1953. Its aim was to develop mind-controlling drugs for use against the Soviet bloc, largely in response to alleged Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques on U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. The CIA wanted to use similar methods on their own captives. The CIA was also interested in being able to manipulate foreign leaders with such techniques, and would later invent several schemes to drug Fidel Castro. MKUltra was a top-secret CIA project in which the agency conducted hundreds of clandestine experiments, sometimes on unwitting U.S. citizens, to assess the potential use of LSD and other drugs for mind control, information gathering and psychological torture. Though Project MKUltra lasted from 1953 until about 1973, details of the illicit program didn't become public until 1975, during a congressional investigation into widespread illegal CIA activities within the United States and around the world. The CIA's mind control program, known at various points in the 1950s and 1960s by the cryptonyms Bluebird, Artichoke, Midnight Climax, MKUltra, MK Delta, among several others, eventually funded 185 non-governmental scientists at 86 institutions, some of the most prestigious universities and hospita. Its arena of interest, which began with the search for a truth drug or hypnotic method as an aid in interrogating enemy agents, broadened by leaps and bounds once brainwashing had become a focal concern. In a 1953 document, for example, Drive. Gottlieb listed subjects he expected one contracting scientist to investigate with the $85,000 the agency was paying him. Prisoners, mental health patients, civilians, and soldiers were all unwittingly drugged or subject to other forms of mind control testing. LSD was their drug of choice, but they also attempted hypnosis, sleep deprivation, isolation, and verbal abuse. Though they never mastered mind control, they found many ways to put prisoners under extreme duress, with many of their techniques going on to be used as interrogation tactics in the Middle East. In the 1950s and 1960s, the height of the Cold War, the United States government feared that Soviet, Chinese and North Korean agents were using mind control to brainwash U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. In response, Allen Dulles, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, approved Project MKUltra in 1953. The covert operation aimed to develop techniques that could be used against Soviet bloc enemies to control human behavior with drugs and other psychological manipulators. The program involved more than 150 human experiments involving psychedelic drugs, paralytics and electroshock therapy. Sometimes the test subjects knew they were participating in a study, but at other times, they had no idea, even when the hallucinogens started taking effect. LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, is a hallucinogenic drug that was first synthesized by a Swiss scientist in the 1930s. During the Cold War, the CIA conducted clandestine experiments with LSD, and other drugs, for mind control, information gathering and other purposes. The LSD experiments were performed on prisoners and, during an experiment in Kentucky, 7 volunteers were given LSD for 77 consecutive days. In some cases, the prisoners were rewarded for their cooperation with injections of high-quality morphine. The CIA put forth millions of dollars into researching methods of mind control that would gain the U.S. the upper hand in psychological warfare, most of their experiments being performed on non-volunteer subjects. Members of the CIA traveled all over the world, testing interrogation techniques while subjects were under the influence of marijuana, LSD, heroin, mescaline, sodium pentothal, the truth drug, and many others. One goal of the project was to brainwash people into becoming spies without their knowledge. Many of the tests were conducted at universities, hospitals or prisons in the United States and Canada. Most of these took place between 1953 and 1964, but it's not clear how many people were involved in the tests. The agency kept notoriously poor records and destroyed most MKUltra documents when the program was officially halted in 1973. The CIA began to experiment with LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, under the direction of agency chemist and poison expert Sidney Gottlieb. He believed the agency could harness the drug's mind-altering properties for brainwashing or psychological torture. LSD was eventually dismissed by MKUltra's researchers as too unpredictable in its results. They had given up on the notion that LSD was the secret that was going to unlock the universe, but it still had a place in the cloak and dagger arsenal. However, by 1962 the CIA and the Army had developed a series of super hallucinogens such as the highly touted BZ, which was thought to hold greater promise as a mind control weapon. Under the auspices of Project MKUltra, the CIA began to fund studies at Columbia University, Stanford University and other colleges on the effects of the drug. After a series of tests, the drug was deemed too unpredictable for use in counterintelligence. MKUltra also included experiments with MDMA, ecstasy, mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, methamphetamine and psilocybin, magic mushrooms. Operation Midnight Climax was an MKUltra project in which government-employed prostitutes lured unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses where drug experiments took place. The CIA dosed the men with LSD and then, while at times drinking cocktails behind a two-way mirror, watched the drug's effects on the men's behavior. Recording devices were installed in the prostitutes' rooms, disguised as electrical outlets. Most of the Operation Midnight Climax experiments took place in San Francisco and Marin County, California, and in New York City. The program had little oversight and the CIA agents involved admitted that a freewheeling, party-like atmosphere prevailed. An agent named George White wrote to Gottlieb in 1971, "Of course I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill and cheat, steal, deceive, rape and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" One of the most famous cases from the MKUltra projects is Frank Olson. On November 28, 1953, it was believed that Olson committed suicide by crashing through a hotel window in New York City and plummeting 150 feet to the sidewalk. However, in 1975, it was revealed that Olson had been injected with LSD, the fatal dose being his fifth. While the government admitted to providing Olson with LSD, they tried to deny that there were mind control experiments going on. Frank Olson was a scientist who worked for the CIA. At a 1953 CIA retreat, Olson drank a cocktail that had been secretly spiked with LSD. A few days later, on November 28, 1953, Olson tumbled to his death from the window of a New York City hotel room in an alleged suicide. The family of Frank Olson decided to have a second autopsy performed in 1994. A forensics team found injuries on the body that had likely occurred before the fall. The findings sparked conspiracy theories that Olson might have been assassinated by the CIA. After prolonged legal proceedings, Olson's family was awarded a settlement of $750,000, and received a personal apology from President Gerald Ford and then CIA Director William Colby. Ken Kesey, author of the 1962 novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, volunteered for MKUltra experiments with LSD while he was a college student at Stanford University. Kesey later went on to promote the drug, hosting LSD-fueled parties that he called acid tests. Acid tests combine drug use with musical performances by bands including the Grateful Dead and psychedelic effects such as fluorescent paint and black lights. These parties influenced the early development of hippie culture and kick-started the 1960s psychedelic drug scene. Other notable people who reportedly volunteered for CIA-backed experiments with LSD include Robert Hunter, the Grateful Dead lyricist, Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, and James Joseph Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston mobster. In 1974, New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh published a story about how the CIA had conducted non-consensual drug experiments and illegal spying operations on U.S. citizens. His report started the lengthy process of bringing long-suppressed details about MKUltra to light. The following year, President Ford, in the wake of the Watergate scandal and amid growing distrust of the U.S. government, set up the United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States to investigate illegal CIA activities, including Project MKUltra and other experiment. The commission was led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and is commonly referred to as the Rockefeller Commission. The Church Committee, helmed by Idaho Democratic Senator Frank Church, was a larger investigation into the abuses of the CIA, FBI and other U.S. intelligence agencies during and after the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon. The Church Committee delved into plots to assassinate foreign leaders, including Cuban dictator Fidel Castro and Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba. It also uncovered thousands of documents related to MKUltra. These revelations resulted in Ford's 1976 executive order on intelligence activities that prohibited experimentation with drugs on human subjects, except with the informed consent, in writing, and witnessed by a disinterested party, of each such human subject. Not long ago, Roseanne made some shocking statements, alluding that Hollywood and the entertainment industry is dominated by MKUltra. MKUltra was the name for a previously classified research program through the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Division. It was the CIA's program of research in behavioral modification and perception manipulation of human beings. It was previously known as Operation Paperclip. Roseanne is suggesting that Hollywood is a tool used in the manipulation of human consciousness, used as a tool for behavior modification and perception control in human beings. Hollywood is the one that keeps all of this power structure. They perpetuate the culture of racism, sexism, classism, genderism and keep it all in place. They continue to feed it, and they make a lot of money doing it. They do it at the behest of their masters, who run everything. I speak on behalf of Hollywood. I go to parties, Oscar parties and things like that, and big stars pull me aside, take my arm and whisper, "I just want to thank you for the things you say." And it blows my mind, but that's the culture. It's a culture of fear. Roseanne's public remark that the CIA's MKUltra program rules in Hollywood is an educated statement, and not just an opinion. It comes from her own experiences within the industry as well as an awareness of known facts about the CIA and their involvement in Hollywood, all of which also happen to be available to the public. It's not hard to see how television and mass advertising can be used as mind control, basically shaping the perception of the individual, as well as displaying what each individual should be like, what type of life to chase and what it means to be successful. Given Roseanne's statement, as well as the information we already have in the public domain, it's safe to say that something fishy is going on in Hollywood. Ask yourself, are your wants really yours? Or have they been programmed into you since birth? Not many people know this, but the CIA has an entire department dedicated to the entertainment industry. It's run through the CIA's Entertainment Industry Liaison Office, which collaborates in a strictly advisory capacity with filmmakers. The CIA doesn't just offer guidance to filmmakers, it even offers money. In 1950, the agency bought the rights to George Orwell's Animal Farm, and then funded the 1954 British animated version of the film. Its involvement had long been rumored, but only in the past decade have those rumors been substantiated. The link between Hollywood and the CIA isn't something new, and Roseanne isn't just blurting out information that has no backing behind it. JFK Assassination. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was assassinated on November 22, 1963, at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time in Dallas, Texas, while riding in a presidential motorcade through Dealey Plaza. Kennedy was riding with his wife Jacqueline, Texas Governor John Connally, and Connally's wife Nellie when he was fatally shot by former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald firing in ambush from a nearby building. Governor Connally was seriously wounded in the attack. The motorcade rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital where President Kennedy was pronounced dead about 30 minutes after the shooting. Connally recovered from his injuries. Oswald was arrested by the Dallas Police Department 70 minutes after the initial shooting. Oswald was charged under Texas state law with the murder of Kennedy, as well as that of Dallas policeman J. D. Tippit, who had been fatally shot a short time after the assassination. At 11:21 a.m. November 24, 1963, as live television cameras were covering his transfer from the city jail to the county jail, Oswald was fatally shot in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters by Dallas nightclub operator Jack Ruby. Oswald was taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital where he soon died. Ruby was convicted of Oswald's murder, though it was later overturned on appeal, and Ruby died in prison in 1967 while awaiting a new trial. After a 10-month investigation, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald assassinated Kennedy, that Oswald had acted entirely alone, and that Ruby had acted alone in killing Oswald. Kennedy was the 8th and most recent U.S. president to die in office, and the 4th, following Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, to be assassinated. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson automatically assumed the presidency upon Kennedy's death. A later investigation. The United States House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, agreed with the Warren Commission that the injuries that Kennedy and Connally sustained were caused by Oswald's 3 rifle shots. But they also concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, as analysis of a dictabelt audio recording pointed to the existence of an additional gunshot, and therefore, a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at the president. The committee was not able to identify any individuals or groups involved with the possible conspiracy. In addition, the HSCA found that the original federal investigations were seriously flawed with respect to information sharing and the possibility of conspiracy. As recommended by the HSCA, the acoustic evidence indicating conspiracy was subsequently re-examined and rejected. In light of the investigative reports determining that reliable acoustic data do not support a conclusion that there was a second gunman, the U.S. Justice Department concluded active investigations and stated that no persuasive evidence can be identified to support the theory of a conspiracy in the assassination of President Kennedy. However, Kennedy's assassination is still the subject of widespread debate and has spawned numerous conspiracy theories and alternative scenarios. Polls conducted from 1966 to 2004 found that up to 80% of Americans suspected that there was a plot or cover-up. President John F. Kennedy chose to travel to Texas to smooth over frictions in the Democratic Party between liberals Ralph Yarborough and Don Yarborough, no relation, and conservative John Connally. A presidential visit to Texas was first agreed upon by Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Texas native, and Texas Governor John Connally, while all three men were together in a meeting in El Paso on June 5, 1963. President Kennedy later decided to embark on the trip with three basic goals in mind. 1. To help raise more Democratic Party presidential campaign fund contributions. 2. Begin his quest for re-election in November 1964. And 3. To help mend political fences among several leading Texas Democratic Party members who appeared to be fighting politically amongst themselves. Since the Kennedy-Johnson ticket had barely won Texas in 1960, and had even lost in Dallas. President Kennedy's trip to Dallas was first announced to the public in September 1963. The exact motorcade route was finalized on November 18 and publicly announced a few days before November 22. Kennedy's motorcade route through Dallas with Johnson and Connally was planned to give the president maximum exposure to local crowds before his arrival for a luncheon at the Trade Mart, where he would meet with civic and business leaders. The White House staff informed the Secret Service that the president would arrive at Dallas Love Field via short flight from Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. The Dallas Trade Mart was preliminarily selected as the place for the luncheon, and Kenneth O'Donnell, President Kennedy's friend and appointment secretary, had selected it as the final destination on the motorcade route. Leaving from Dallas Love Field, the motorcade had been allotted 45 minutes to reach the Trade Mart at a planned arrival time of 12:15 p.m. The itinerary was designed to serve as a meandering 10-mile, 16-kilometer, route between the two places, and the motorcade vehicles could be driven slowly within the allotted time. Special Agent Winston G. Lawson, a member of the White House detail who acted as the advanced Secret Service agent, and Secret Service Agent Forrest V. Sorrells, special agent in charge of the Dallas office, were the most active in planning the actual motorcade route. On November 14, both men attended a meeting at Love Field and drove over the route that Sorrells believed was best suited for the motorcade. From Love Field, the route passed through a suburban section of Dallas, through downtown along Main Street, and finally to the Trade Mart via a short segment of the Stemmons Freeway. The president had planned to return to Love Field to depart for a fundraising dinner in Austin later that day. For the return trip, the agents selected a more direct route, which was approximately 4 miles, or 6.4 kilometers. Some of this route would be used after the assassination. The planned route to the Trade Mart was widely reported in Dallas newspapers several days before the event, for the benefit of people who wished to view the motorcade. To pass directly through downtown Dallas, a route west along Main Street, rather than Elm Street, 1 block to the north, was chosen, since this was the traditional parade route and provided the maximal building and crowd views. The Main Street section of the route precluded a direct turn onto the Fort Worth Turnpike exit, which served also as the Stemmons Freeway exit, which was the route to the Trade Mart, as this exit was only accessible from Elm Street. Therefore, the planned motorcade route included a short 1-block turn at the end of the downtown segment of Main Street, onto Houston Street for 1 block northward, before turning again west onto Elm. That way they could proceed through Dealey Plaza before exiting Elm onto the Stemmons Freeway. The Texas School Book Depository was situated at the northwest corner of the Houston and Elm Street intersection. 3 vehicles were used for Secret Service and police protection in the Dallas motorcade. The first car, an unmarked white Ford hardtop, carried Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry, Secret Service Agent Win Lawson, Sheriff Bill Decker, and Dallas Field Agent Forrest Sorrells. The second car, a 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible, was occupied by driver agent Bill Greer, St. Roy Kellerman, Governor John Connally, Nellie Connally, President Kennedy, and Jackie Kennedy. The third car, a 1955 Cadillac convertible codenamed Halfback, contained driver agent Sam Kinney, A.T. Zayach Emery Roberts, presidential aides Ken O'Donnell and Dave Powers, driver agent George Hickey and PRS agent Glenn Bennett. Secret Service agents Clint Hill, Jack Reddy, Tim McIntyre and Paul Landis rode on the running boards. On November 22, after a breakfast speech in Fort Worth, where President Kennedy had stayed overnight after arriving from San Antonio, Houston, and Washington, D.C., the previous day, the president boarded Air Force One, which departed at 11:10 and arrived at Love Field 15 minutes later. At about 11:40, the presidential motorcade left Love Field for the trip through Dallas, running on a schedule about 10 minutes longer than the planned 45, due to enthusiastic crowds estimated at 150,000% U-201-3200,000 people, and 2 unplanned stops directed by the president. By the time the motorcade reached Dealey Plaza, they were only 5 minutes away from their planned destination. President Kennedy's open-top 1961 Lincoln Continental 4-door convertible limousine entered Dealey Plaza at 12:30 p.m. CST. Nellie Connally, the First Lady of Texas, turned around to the president, who was sitting behind her, and commented, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you," which President Kennedy acknowledged by saying, "No, you certainly can't." Those were Kennedy's last words. From Houston Street, the presidential limousine made the planned left turn onto Elm, providing it access to the Stemmons Freeway exit. As the vehicle turned onto Elm, the motorcade passed by the Texas School Book Depository. Suddenly, shots were fired at President Kennedy as his motorcade continued down Elm Street. About 80% of the witnesses recalled hearing 3 shots. A minority of the witnesses recognized the first gunshot they heard as weapon fire, but there was hardly any reaction to the first shot from a majority of the people in the crowd or those riding in the motorcade. Many bystanders later said that they heard what they first thought to either be a firecracker or the backfire of one of the vehicles shortly after the president had begun waving. Although some close witnesses recalled seeing the limousine slow down, nearly stop, or completely stop, the Warren Commission, based on the Zapruder film, found that the limousine had traveled an average speed of 11.2 miles per hour over the 186 feet of Elm Street immediately preceding the fatal head. Within 1 second of each other, Governor Connally and Mrs. Kennedy turned abruptly from looking to their left to looking to their right, beginning at Zapruder film frame 162. Connally, like the president, was a World War II military veteran but unlike him, a longtime hunter. Connally testified that he immediately recognized the sound as that of a high-powered rifle, then he turned his head and torso rightward, attempting to see President Kennedy behind him. Governor Connally testified he could not see the president, so he then started to turn forward again, turning from his right to his left. The governor also testified that when his head was facing about 20 degrees left of center, he was hit in his upper right back by a bullet that he did not hear get fired. The doctor who operated on Connally measured his head at the time he was hit as having turned 27 degrees left of center. After Connally was hit, he shouted, "Oh, no, no, no. My God. They're going to kill us all." Mrs. Connally testified that just after hearing a loud, frightening noise that came from somewhere behind her and to her right, she turned toward President Kennedy and saw him raise up his arms and elbows, with his hands in front of his face and throat. She then heard another gunshot and then Governor Connally yelling. Mrs. Connally then turned away from Kennedy toward her husband, at which point another gunshot sounded, and both she and the limousine's rear interior were covered with fragments of skull, blood, and brain. According to the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Kennedy was waving to the crowds on his right with his right arm upraised on the side of the limo when a shot entered his upper back, penetrated his neck, and slightly damaged a spinal vertebra and the top of his right lung. The bullet exited his throat nearly centerline just beneath his larynx and nicked the left side of his suit tie knot. He raised his elbows and clenched his fists in front of his face and neck, then leaned forward and left. Mrs. Kennedy, facing him, then put her arms around him in concern. According to the Warren Commission's single bullet theory, Governor Connally also reacted after the same bullet penetrated his back just below his right armpit. The bullet created an oval-shaped entry wound, impacted and destroyed 4 inches of his right fifth rib, and exited his chest just below his right nipple. This created a 2.5-inch oval-shaped air-sucking chest wound. That same bullet then entered his arm just above his right wrist and cleanly shattered his right radius bone into 8 pieces. The bullet exited just below the wrist at the inner side of his right palm and finally lodged in his left inner thigh. The Warren Commission theorized that the single bullet struck sometime between Zapruder frames 210 and 225, while the House Select Committee theorized that it struck at approximately Zapruder frame 190. According to the Warren Commission, a second shot that struck the president was recorded at Zapruder film frame 313. The commission made no conclusion as to whether this was the second or third bullet fired. The presidential limousine then passed in front of the John Neely Bryan North Pergola concrete structure. The two investigative committees concluded that the second shot to hit the president entered the rear of his head. The House Select Committee placed the entry wound 4 inches higher than the Warren Commission placed it, and passed in fragments through his skull. This created a large, roughly ovular hole on the rear right side of the head. The president's blood and fragments of his scalp, brain, and skull landed on the interior of the car, the inner and outer surfaces of the front glass windshield, the raised sun visors, the front engine hood, and the rear trunk lid. His blood and fragments also landed on the Secret Service follow-up car and its driver's left arm, as well on the motorcycle officers who were riding on both sides of the president just behind his vehicle. Secret Service Special Agent Clint Hill was riding on the left front running board of the follow-up car, which was immediately behind the presidential limousine. Hill testified that he heard one shot. Then, as documented in other films, and concurrent with Zapruder frame 308, he jumped off into Elm Street and ran forward to try to get on the limousine and protect the president. Hill testified to the Warren Commission that after he jumped into Elm Street, he heard 2 more shots. After the president was shot in the head, Mrs. Kennedy began climbing out onto the back of the limousine, though she later didn't have any recollection of doing so. Hill believed she was reaching for something, perhaps a piece of the president's skull. He jumped onto the back of the limousine while at the same time Mrs. Kennedy returned to her seat, and he clung to the car as it exited Dealey Plaza and accelerated, speeding to Parkland Memorial Hospital. After Mrs. Kennedy crawled back into her limousine seat, both Governor and Mrs. Connolly heard her repeatedly say, "They have killed my husband. I have his brains in my hand." Mrs. Kennedy recalled, "All the ride to the hospital I kept bending over him saying, 'Jack, Jack, can you hear me? I love you. Jack.' I kept holding the top of his head down trying to keep the brains in." Governor Connolly was riding in the same limousine in a seat directly in front of the president, and 3 inches more to the left than Kennedy. He was also seriously injured, but survived. Doctors later stated that after the governor was shot, his wife pulled him onto her lap, and the resulting posture helped close his front chest wound, which was causing air to be sucked directly into his chest around his collapsed right lung. James Tague was a spectator and witness to the assassination. He received a minor wound to the right cheek while standing 531 feet away from the depository's 6th-floor easternmost window, 270 feet in front of and slightly to the right of President Kennedy's head-facing direction and more than 16 feet below the top of the president's head. Tague's injury occurred when a bullet or bullet fragment with no copper casing struck the nearby Main Street South curb. A deputy sheriff noticed some blood on Tague's cheek, and Tague realized that something had stung his face during the shooting. When Tague pointed to where he had been standing, the police officer noticed a bullet smear on a nearby curb. 9 months later the FBI removed the curb, and a spectrographic analysis revealed metallic residue consistent with that of the lead core in Oswald's ammunition. Tague testified before the Warren Commission and initially stated that he was wounded on his cheek by either the second or third shot of the 3 shots that he remembered hearing. When the Commission counsel pressed him to be more specific, Tague testified that he was wounded by the second shot. The presidential limousine passed by the grassy knoll to the north of Elm Street at the time of the fatal headshot. As the motorcade left Dealey Plaza, police officers and spectators ran up the grassy hill and from the triple underpass, to the area behind a 5-foot-high stockade fence atop the knoll, separating it from a parking lot. No sniper was found there. S.M. Holland, who had been watching the motorcade on the triple underpass, testified that immediately after the shots were fired, he saw a puff of smoke arising from the trees right by the stockade fence, and then ran around the corner where the overpass joined the fence, but did not see anyone running from that area. Lee Bowers, a railroad switchman who was sitting in a two-story tower, had an unobstructed view of the rear of the stockade fence atop the grassy knoll during the shooting. He saw 4 men in the area between his tower and Elm Street. That included a middle-aged man and a younger man, standing 10 to 15 feet apart near the triple underpass, who did not seem to know each other, and 1 or 2 uniformed parking lot attendants. At the time of the shooting, he saw something out of the ordinary, a sort of milling around, which he could not identify. Bowers testified that 1 or both of the men were still there when motorcycle officer Clyde Haygood ran up the grassy knoll to the back of the fence. In a 1966 interview, Bowers clarified that the 2 men he saw were standing in the opening between the pergola and the fence, and that no one was behind the fence at the time the shots were fired. Meanwhile, Howard Brennan, a steamfitter who was sitting across the street from the Texas School Book Depository, notified police that he was watching the motorcade go by when he heard a shot that came from above, and looked up to see a man with a rifle take another shot from a corner window on the 6th floor. He said he had seen the same man looking out the window minutes earlier. Brennan gave a description of the shooter, and Dallas police subsequently broadcast descriptions at 12:45, 12:48, and 12:55 p.m. after the second shot was fired. Brennan recalled that this man, he saw previous was aiming for his last shot, and maybe paused for another second as though to assure himself that he had hit his mark. As Brennan spoke to the police in front of the building, they were joined by Harold Norman and James Jarman, Jr., 2 employees of the Texas School Book Depository who had watched the motorcade from windows at the southeast corner of the building's 5th floor. Norman reported that he heard 3 gunshots come from directly over their heads. Norman also heard the sounds of a bolt-action rifle and cartridges dropping on the floor above them. Dallas police sealed off the exits from the Texas School Book Depository range approximately between 12:33 and 12:50 p.m. There were at least 104 eyewitnesses in Dealey Plaza who were on record with an opinion as to the direction from which the shots came. 54 thought that all shots came from the Texas School Book Depository building. 33 thought that they came from either the grassy knoll or the triple underpass. 9 thought that each shot came from a location entirely distinct from the knoll or the depository. 5 believed that they heard shots from 2 locations, and 3 thought that the shots originated from a direction consistent with both the knoll and the depository. Governor Connolly, meanwhile, was taken to emergency surgery, where he underwent 2 operations that day. Members of the president's security detail were attempting to remove Kennedy's body from the hospital when they briefly scuffled with Dallas officials, including Dallas County Coroner Earl Rose, who believed that he was legally obligated to perform an autopsy before the president's body was removed. The Secret Service pushed through and Rose eventually stepped aside. The forensic panel of the HSCA, of which Rose was a member, later reported that Texas law indicated that it was the responsibility of the Justice of the Peace to determine the cause of death as well as the necessity of whether an autopsy was needed to determine the cause of death. Teron Ward, a Justice of the Peace in Dallas County, signed the official record of inquest as well as a second certificate of death. A few minutes after 2 p.m. CST, Kennedy's body was taken from Parkland Hospital to Love Field. His casket was then loaded onto Air Force One through the rear door, where it remained at the rear of the passenger compartment in place of a removed row of seats. Johnson had accompanied Kennedy to Dallas and was riding 2 cars behind the president in the motorcade. The new president refused to leave for Washington without Kennedy's remains and his widow. At 2:38 p.m. CST, 2038 UTC, Lyndon Johnson, with Jacqueline Kennedy at his side, took the oath of office administered by federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes on board Air Force One shortly before departing from Love Field for the flight back to Washington, D.C. The autopsy was performed at the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. The procedure began at about 8 p.m. and ended at about midnight EST. The choice of autopsy hospital in the Washington, D.C. area was made at the request of Mrs. Kennedy, on the basis that John F. Kennedy had been a naval officer during World War II. The state funeral took place in Washington, D.C., during the 3 days that followed the assassination. The body of President Kennedy was flown back to Washington, D.C., and placed in the East Room of the White House for 24 hours. On the Sunday after the assassination, his coffin was carried on a horse-drawn case into the United States Capitol to lie in state. Throughout the day and night, hundreds of thousands of people lined up to view the guarded casket. Representatives from over 90 countries attended the state funeral on Monday, November 25. After the Requiem Mass at St. Matthew's Cathedral, the president was laid to rest 2.7 miles from the White House at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. No radio or television stations broadcast the assassination live. Most media crews did not ride with the motorcade, but were instead waiting at the Dallas Trade Mart in anticipation of President Kennedy's arrival there. Members of the media who were with the motorcade were riding at the rear of the procession. The Dallas police were recording their radio transmissions over 2 individual channels. A frequency designated as Channel 1 was used for routine police communications, while Channel 2 was an auxiliary channel dedicated to the president's motorcade. Up until the time of the assassination, most of the broadcasts on the second channel consisted of Police Chief Jesse Curry's announcements of the location of the motorcade as it traveled through the city. President Kennedy's last seconds of traveling through Dealey Plaza were recorded on silent 8mm film for the 26.6 seconds before, during, and immediately following the assassination. This famous film footage was taken by garment manufacturer and amateur cameraman Abraham Zapruder, and became known as the Zapruder film. Frame enlargements from the Zapruder film were published by Life magazine shortly after the assassination. The footage was first shown publicly as a film at the trial of Clay Shaw in 1969, and on television in 1975. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, in 1999 an arbitration panel ordered the United States government to pay $615,384 per second of film to Zapruder's heirs for giving the film to the National Archives. The complete film, which lasts for roughly over 26 seconds, was valued at $16 million. Zapruder was not the only person who photographed at least part of the assassination. A total of 32 photographers were in Dealey Plaza that day. Amateur movies taken by Orville Nix, Marie Muckmore, shown on television in New York on November 26, 1963, and photographer Charles Bronson captured the fatal shot, although at a greater distance than Zapruder did. Other motion picture films were taken in Dealey Plaza at or around the time of the shooting by Robert Hughes, F. Mark Bell, Elsie Dorman, John Martin Jr., Patsy Paschal, Tina Towner, James Underwood, Dave Wiegman, Mal Couch, Thomas Atkins, and an unknown woman in a blue dress on the south side of Elm Street. Still photos were taken by Philip Willis, Mary Moorman, Hugh W. Pietzner Jr., Wilma Bond, Robert Croft, and many others. Ike Eltigens was the lone professional photographer in Dealey Plaza who was not in the press cars. He was a photo editor for the Associated Press in Dallas. An unidentified woman, nicknamed by researchers as the Babushka Lady, might have been filming the presidential motorcade during the assassination. She was seen apparently doing so on film and in photographs taken by the others. Previously unknown color footage filmed on the assassination day by George Jeffreys was released on February 19, 2007, by the Sixth Floor Museum. The film does not include the actual shooting, having been taken over 90 seconds beforehand and a couple of blocks away. The only detail relevant to the investigation of the assassination is a clear view of President Kennedy's bunched suit jacket, just below the collar, which has led to different calculations about how low in the back President Kennedy was first shot. After the Dallas police arrested Oswald and collected physical evidence at the crime scenes, they held Oswald at their headquarters for interrogation. All afternoon, they asked Oswald about the Tippit shooting and the assassination of the president. They intermittently questioned him for approximately 12 hours between 2:30 p.m., on November 22, and 11 a.m., on November 24. Throughout this interrogation, Oswald denied any involvement with either Kennedy's assassination or Patrolman Tippit's murder. Captain Fritz of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau did most of the questioning and kept only rudimentary notes. Days later, he wrote a report of the interrogation from notes he made afterwards. There were no stenographic or tape recordings. Representatives of other law enforcement agencies were also present, including the FBI and the Secret Service, and occasionally participated in the questioning. Several of the FBI agents who were present wrote contemporaneous reports of the interrogation. On the evening of the assassination, Dallas police performed paraffin tests on Oswald's hands and right cheek in an apparent effort to determine, by means of a scientific test, whether or not he had recently fired a weapon. The results were positive for the hands and negative for the right cheek. These tests were unreliable, and the Warren Commission did not rely on the results of the test in making their findings. Oswald provided little information during his questioning by police. When confronted with evidence that he could not explain, he resorted to statements that were found to be false. The FBI was the first authority to complete an investigation. On December 9, 1963, the FBI issued a report and gave it to the Warren Commission. The FBI stated that 3 bullets were fired during the Kennedy assassination. The Warren Commission agreed with the FBI investigation that 3 shots were fired but disagreed with the FBI report on which shots hit Kennedy and which hit Governor Connally. The FBI report claimed that the first shot hit President Kennedy, the second shot hit Governor Connally, and the third shot hit President Kennedy in the head, killing him. In contrast, the Warren Commission concluded that one of the 3 shots missed, one of the shots hit President Kennedy and then struck Governor Connally, and a third shot struck President Kennedy in the head, killing him. The President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, known unofficially as the Warren Commission, was established on November 29, 1963, by President Johnson to investigate the assassination. Its 888-page final report was presented to Johnson on September 24, 1964, and made public 3 days later. It concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the killing of President Kennedy and the wounding of Texas Governor John Connally, and that Jack Ruby also acted alone in the murder of Oswald. The Commission's findings and conclusions have since proven controversial and been both criticized and supported by later studies. The Commission took its unofficial name, the Warren Commission, from its chairman, Chief Justice Earl Warren. According to published transcripts of Johnson's presidential phone conversations, some major officials were opposed to forming such a commission, and several commission members took part only with extreme reluctance. One of their chief reservations was that a commission would ultimately create more controversy than consensus, and those fears ultimately proved valid. All of the Warren Commission's records were submitted to the National Archives in 1964. The unpublished portion of those records was initially sealed for 75 years, to 2039, under a general National Archives policy that applied to all federal investigations by the executive branch of government. A period intended to serve as protection for innocent persons who could otherwise be damaged because of their relationship with participants in the case. The 75-year rule no longer exists, supplanted by the Freedom of Information Act of 1966 and the JFK Records Act of 1992. Previously unknown color footage filmed on the assassination day by George Jeffreys was released on February 19, 2007, by the 6th Floor Museum. The film does not include the actual shooting, having been taken over 90 seconds beforehand and a couple of blocks away. The only detail relevant to the investigation of the assassination is a clear view of President Kennedy's bunched suit jacket, just below the collar, which has led to different calculations about how low in the back President Kennedy was first shot. After the Dallas police arrested Oswald and collected physical evidence at the crime scenes, they held Oswald at their headquarters for interrogation. All afternoon, they asked Oswald about the Tippit shooting and the assassination of the president. They intermittently questioned him for approximately 12 hours between 2:30 p.m., on November 22, and 11 a.m., on November 24. Throughout this interrogation, Oswald denied any involvement with either Kennedy's assassination or Patrolman Tippit's murder. Captain Fritz of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau did most of the questioning and kept only rudimentary notes. Days later, he wrote a report of the interrogation from notes he made afterwards. There were no stenographic or tape recordings. Representatives of other law enforcement agencies were also present, including the FBI and the Secret Service, and occasionally participated in the questioning. Several of the FBI agents who were present wrote contemporaneous reports of the interrogation. On the evening of the assassination, Dallas police performed paraffin tests on Oswald's hands and right cheek in an apparent effort to determine, by means of a scientific test, whether or not he had recently fired a weapon. The results were positive for the hands and negative for the right cheek. These tests were unreliable, and the Warren Commission did not rely on the results of the test in making their findings. Oswald provided little information during his questioning by police. When confronted with evidence that he could not explain, he resorted to statements that were found to be false. The FBI was the first authority to complete an investigation. On December 9, 1963, the FBI issued a report and gave it to the Warren Commission. The FBI stated that 3 bullets were fired during the Kennedy assassination. The Warren Commission agreed with the FBI investigation that 3 shots were fired but disagreed with the FBI report on which shots hit Kennedy and which hit Governor Connally. The FBI report claimed that the first shot hit President Kennedy, the second shot hit Governor Connally, and the third shot hit President Kennedy in the head, killing him. In contrast, the Warren Commission concluded that one of the 3 shots missed, one of the shots hit President Kennedy and then struck Governor Connally, and a third shot struck President Kennedy in the head, killing him. The President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, known unofficially as the Warren Commission, was established on November 29, 1963, by President Johnson to investigate the assassination. Its 888-page final report was presented to Johnson on September 24, 1964, and made public 3 days later. It concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the killing of President Kennedy and the wounding of Texas Governor John Connally, and that Jack Ruby also acted alone in the murder of Oswald. The Commission's findings and conclusions have since proven controversial and been both criticized and supported by later studies. The Commission took its unofficial name, the Warren Commission, from its chairman, Chief Justice Earl Warren. According to published transcripts of Johnson's presidential phone conversations, some major officials were opposed to forming such a commission, and several commission members took part only with extreme reluctance. One of their chief reservations was that a commission would ultimately create more controversy than consensus, and those fears ultimately proved valid. All of the Warren Commission's records were submitted to the National Archives in 1964. The unpublished portion of those records was initially sealed for 75 years, to 2039, under a general National Archives policy that applied to all federal investigations by the executive branch of government. A period intended to serve as protection for innocent persons who could otherwise be damaged because of their relationship with participants in the case. The 75-year rule no longer exists, supplanted by the Freedom of Information Act of 1966 and the JFK Records Act of 1992. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.